Hello. Welcome to 2 Chronicles, chapter 20. 2 Chronicles, chapter 20. Today we are going to talk about God defeating the armies that came against the nation of Judah without the people of Judah ever having to lift a sword or a weapon. That's the topic of today. The outline is available for free download on our website. When did these events happen on our historical timeline? Well, these would have been about 900 years before Jesus. 920 to 890 BC is the window in which King Jehoshaphat's reign falls. We've been talking about him for a couple chapters now. Jehoshaphat reigned over Judah, which was the southern kingdom, for 25 years. And again, it's about 900 years before Jesus. Now for our key characters, we have Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah. Then we have a guy named Jehaziel, who is new here. He was described as the son of Zechariah. He was filled with the Spirit of God during the events of this chapter, and he prophesied that the Lord was going to give victory and deliverance to the people of Judah. More on that a little bit later. Then we have the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Moonites, and the Edomites. These guys banded together to come up north and to attack Judah. As we mentioned, God is going to thwart them, and that is going to be the topic of the outline. 2 or 3 locations to highlight here. First of all, Jerusalem. That's the capital of Judah. That's where the king was. And then 2 new locations, En Gedi and a place called Ziz, Z-I-Z. These are locations that are on the west coast of the Dead Sea, and Judah's enemies passed through these locations as they were coming up to Judah to attack them. Most of the chapters so far in 2 Chronicles have been rather short, but this one has, I believe, 37 verses, and so we have a lot to cover here in our outline. First section, verses 1 through 13, the Moabites, the Ammonites, and the Edomites come up to attack the nation of Judah. So a large army of Edomites and Ammonites and Moabites came up from the south to attack Judah, and the messenger who reported their arrival, or their soon arrival, told King Jehoshaphat that they were at En Gedi, which again is on the west coast of the Dead Sea. Jehoshaphat was very afraid, and he announced that the people in Judah should fast and pray, and he had all the people of Judah assemble at the temple in Jerusalem. Jehoshaphat was there with that assembly, and in the midst of that assembly, he called out to God for help, and he acknowledged that God had rule over all of the nations, and that he certainly had the power to withstand Judah's enemies and to give Judah deliverance and victory if he wanted to. And Jehoshaphat was very clear, he was very humble, especially for a king. It's very clear that his people needed God's help to win this battle. They did not have the capability on their own. And he asked God to hear his people's prayer and to defend them. He said, I like this quote, "We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you." I guess that kind of rhymes too. Probably not in the Hebrew though. That brings us to section number 2, verses 14 through 19. The Spirit of the Lord falls on Jehaziel. So the Spirit of God filled a man named Jehaziel who was there at the assembly, and he prophesied God's words to all of the people that were there. He said that God was going to give Judah victory. The army of Judah was going to go out, or they were supposed to go out and meet their enemies on the battlefield, but God was going to give them victory without them ever having to do any kind of fighting. They didn't even have to shoot an arrow or draw a sword. When the people and the king heard Jehaziel's words, the text says that they fell down, they bowed down before God, and they praised him. Section number 3, verses 20 through 30, God gives Jehoshaphat and Judah victory. So the next morning, the army set out to meet their enemies on the battlefield, and Jehoshaphat appointed men to dress in holy attire, the text says, and to go in front of the army, and they were charged with singing praises to God. When they met their enemies on the battlefield, the singers began to praise God, and that's when God went to work to give Judah their victory. God set an ambush for the enemy army. We aren't given a lot of details about this. It's interesting. Some scholars think that maybe these were angels who ambushed the enemy army in the appearance of men. We don't know. It could have been something internal to the enemy army, somebody betraying them or something like that. But God somehow arranged an ambush to come upon the enemies. And this caused a tremendous amount of confusion in the enemy camp, and they ended up fighting one another until they had destroyed one another. So they destroy themselves right in front of Judah, and Judah now has the victory, again, without having to fight, just as Jehaziel had prophesied in the Spirit. It took the people of it took the people of Judah. Did I say Israel earlier? I might have. If I said Israel, just replace it with Judah. It took the people of Judah 3 days to collect all the spoils that were laying around now that these armies were destroyed. On the fourth day, they blessed the Lord and returned to Jerusalem with joy in their hearts. This is an interesting story, and it's certainly not documented in the same detail in 1 Kings or 2 Kings. And so this shows the importance of reading both accounts, because you get different details in 1 Kings and 2 Kings versus 1 Chronicles and 2 Chronicles. And then finally, verses 31 through 37, the end of Jehoshaphat's reign. A few of Jehoshaphat's faults are mentioned at the end of chapter 20, including an unwise alliance that he made with Ahaziah, who was Ahab's son. You remember God rebuked him for making for helping Ahab, because Ahab was the really wicked king of Israel. When his son Ahaziah takes the throne of Israel, Jehoshaphat makes another pact with him, and God criticizes him again for making that pact. So, that said, Jehoshaphat did, quote, what was right in the sight of the Lord during his 25-year reign. So yes, he made some mistakes. He had a habit of making bad friends with wicked people, but in general, he was a man who tried to serve the Lord. And so that is the end of the reign of Jehoshaphat, who we've been talking about for a couple chapters, and that is the end of 2 Chronicles chapter 20. Now let's finish up with application. It's possible, and I think we can learn this from this chapter, it's possible that God puts us in situations that we can't handle, situations where we're in over our heads, in order to teach us to trust Him. Jehoshaphat didn't have the manpower to fight against his enemies, and I think it's admirable that he immediately admits that and he goes to the Lord. He doesn't try to pretend. You don't see him trying to strategize and doing this of his own wisdom and skill on the battlefield. He just goes to the Lord and he says, Lord, I don't have the power to fight this battle. He immediately called out to God for help. I was wondering, why are stories like this recorded in the Bible? What can we learn from them? Well, maybe stories like this are in the Bible to teach us how to respond when we encounter situations that are too difficult for us to handle. God doesn't promise us that our whole life is going to be easy. He never promises us that there's not going to be a situation that we're going to get into where we don't know what to do. How do we handle a situation like that? Well, I think Jehoshaphat gives us a great example in 2 Chronicles chapter 20.